Greetings. So we are going to do something totally different on this video today, and this is going to be really something special only for my really hardcore subscribers, or those of you that are intimately familiar with fuel trims and lean enriched system diagnosis. So either way, if you want to participate and you maybe are not so comfortable or brushed up on your fuel trim diagnosis and lean enriched condition diagnosis skills, then you will want to watch the life-changing video. And I am not being sarcastic. It will be life-changing. It's my video, Secret of Engine Problem Diagnosis, Fuel Trims. And if you master that video, I promise you, will change everything for you. For those of you guys that did watch it and think you got it down pretty good, let's find out. All right, necessary background information. We have a 2000 Pontiac Trans Am WS6 6-speed manual transmission. It is a V8 engine, 5.7 liter LS1. There are no drivability problems whatsoever. All that I have is check engine light with the code that I will show you, and that is all that I can tell you. It does not feel like there's any misfires, anything like that. No drivability issues whatsoever. So that is our starting point. All right, here is a look at the code. And of course, for those of you that, if you are a hardcore subscriber, that thought maybe this would be because of my goofing around with the throttle position sensor in the last video. No, I've actually had this problem for actually some time and just never got around to really fixing it. But as you can see, we've got a P0171 fuel trim system lean bank 1. So let's ask our first quiz question and set the tone for the day. Your first quiz question, based on the information so far, diagnostic trouble code P0171 O2 sensor lean bank 1 is what we found. Which of the following is not a possible problem with this car? A bad O2 sensor. B, an exhaust leak ahead of the O2 sensor. C, dirty mass airflow sensor. D, intake manifold runner leak on bank 1, or E, all of these are possible. Why don't you go ahead and hit pause on your player and take a moment to think about it, and I will come back with the answer. All right, last chance. Are you sure? All right, the correct answer is, of course, E, all of these are possible. Oh! Burned, owned like spelled with a little P instead of an O, owned. What happened there? Well, like I said, I know my viewers are smart, so got to keep you on your toes here. Of course, most of you guys probably voted for C on that, but let's review why the answer is D, all choices are possible. It is because even though your P0171 on bank 1, you are thinking, and properly, by the way, what are all the things that would explain a lean condition on only bank 1? But consider this scenario, which actually I have shown before in a previous video. I believe it was, I don't remember what car it was. I don't even remember what video it was, come to think of it. But it was a P0171. However, the car had a dirty mass airflow sensor. And the reason is because on that particular car, the diagnostic trouble code sets at a long-term fuel trim of, I believe it was 24, and the bank 1 long-term fuel trim was 24, but the bank 2 long-term fuel trim was 23. And the diagnostic trouble code sets after 2 consecutive drive cycles where the long-term fuel trim reaches 24. It never reached 24 on that car in the video. However, because obviously we have a condition that is affecting both banks, it was not your typical train of thought for a P0171 code. After cleaning the mass airflow sensor, and bank 1 went down to 1 on the long-term fuel trim and bank 2 was flat at 0, that is confirmation that it is not a bank-specific code, but we just didn't happen to hit the code. So the moral of the story is when you do your diagnosis, even on a particular specific bank code, always pull up that second bank, because we did not have enough data to eliminate a dual bank problem based on what we have so far, because we only have the code. So that is the way it's going to be today. So keep on your toes and let's move on. All right, let's go ahead and take a look at a freeze frame here. And you'll notice I did block out some information. That's because that's going to be coming up in some other questions. But the main information we want to get here is we see our long-term fuel trim at bank 1 is 24.2%. Long-term fuel trim bank 2 is only 0.2%. So at this point now, we do know that this is indeed a bank-specific issue. Now, some of you are saying, well, you can't be totally sure if you're really into these fuel trims because we don't have total fuel trims since I blocked out the short term. For the next test question, we are going to assume, and by the way, they are, the short-term fuel trims are perfectly normal. So we are not going to have to account for those in the long-term fuel trim. So for your next test question, given this data, now, based on this new information, which of the following is not a possible problem? A fuel injector is clogged. B, the MAP sensor bad. C, an air injection reaction leak. D, intake manifold leak. Or E, all of these are still possible. Go ahead and think about it. And the correct answer is a bad MAP sensor is not a possibility based on the data we have now. All right, based on our data we have now, we would have to think of anything that could possibly be a bank-specific problem. So a clogged fuel injector, of course, could be bank-specific. A air injection reaction leak, which we've never talked about before, but this vehicle does have air injection reaction and it is split to the exhaust. We'll talk about that at some point if you're not familiar with it, but it is possible because air injection reaction is split to each bank, some type of leak or something like that, maybe bad check valve, whatever. But there are issues where you could have a bank-specific issue with the air injection reaction. Unlikely, but it is a possibility. And of course, an intake manifold leak at any particular runner would of course be bank specific and in fact cylinder specific. So the MAP sensor, the manifold absolute pressure sensor, which we covered in a previous video, that would always affect both banks. There is no way that a MAP sensor problem could only affect one bank. So therefore we can rule out things like that, a mass airflow sensor, a throttle position sensor, a bad fuel pump, anything that would affect both banks, a fuel pressure regulator, we can eliminate off of our list. So let's go ahead and see if we can narrow down a little more what might be causing this problem. All right, here is all of the data from the freeze frame now so you can see it. So, based on this information, I am going to ask a question about where you think our direction will go. So go ahead, take a look at that and see what you think, and then I will ask the quiz question. I suggest pausing it now while you think so that you can come up with an idea. And the question is, based on the freeze frame data that you just saw, which of the following are we most likely to eliminate as a possible direction? A fuel injector issue on bank 1. B, an O2 sensor issue on bank 1. C, an exhaust issue on bank 1. D, a vacuum leak on bank 1. Or E, all of these are equal. By the way, before giving the answer, I would like to point out, vacuum is spelled with one C. And if you send me an email and spell vacuum, V-A-C-U-M-E, I will delete you from this channel. All right, the answer is, of course, a vacuum leak on bank 1 is the least likely explanation for that data. Why is this probably not a vacuum leak? There's a couple of clues on this. First of all, the RPM. Second of all, the throttle position angle, and also we have the mass airflow sensor here, all indicating that the gas pedal is clearly being pressed and the engine is under load. As explained in my fuel trims video, the effect of a vacuum leak is minimized when the throttle position is open because the extra air coming in minimizes the effect on the fuel trim that is needed to compensate for the greater percentage of unmetered air that is present at vacuum when very minimal air is coming into the engine. So again, you might want to review that in the fuel trims video. So we are not going to be inclined to look at a vacuum leak. Anything else that was on that list is going to be more likely, maybe some more likely than others, but we can pretty much eliminate a vacuum leak based on the data. All right, before we start hooking up to the car, let's go ahead and do one more thing. Let's look at our fuel trims here again. So we've got our long-term fuel trim, of course, setting the code. We've got our short-term fuel trims here. So based on this data with the fuel trims, one more question. Based on that fuel trim data that you just looked at, what would we expect the O2 sensor trace to look like on the Bank 1 Sensor 1? Will it be A, fixed at a high voltage? B, it will be fixed at low voltage? C, it will be fixed at 0? Or D, it will be oscillating between 0.1 and 0.9 volts as normal? Or E, all of the above? Well, actually, I obviously probably should have removed it because that don't make no goddamn sense. And your answer will be D. It will oscillate normally. So if you're not getting any of these right, I'm going to suggest that you go back and watch the video, which I will put in the description, because I don't know why you would just hang around like this, wasting your time. But particularly if you got that last question wrong, you definitely will want to review it because it is a critical point of understanding. But basically, for your O2 sensor signal, we'll put 9 volt here and 0.1 volt here. If the signal is low on the O2 sensor, then it is reading a lean condition. And of course, at 9 volts, it will be reading a rich condition. So we know that we would not expect the O2 sensor to be stuck at a high voltage because that would be indicating a rich condition on our code. We would not be getting a lean code. So we know it's not going to be that. Now, it would seem logical that we would have this thing fixed in a lean position. We know that that is not going to be what we see when we look at the oxygen sensor in real time shortly, because the short-term fuel trim was just about at 0. So if you remember, the long-term fuel trim sets a new baseline for the short-term fuel trim. So if we look at our long-term fuel trim and we know it's at 24, if our short-term fuel trim is hovering around 0, then we know our long-term fuel trim at 24 has successfully set a new baseline for the short-term fuel trim. And because the short-term fuel trim is at its baseline, the O2 sensor will be able to do its thing. If we found that the short-term fuel trim was also stuck very high, then in that case, we may very well expect to see that your O2 sensor is fixed lean at closer to 0.1 volts. But if you are not following with this, all of it is much more very clearly explained in that video on fuel trims. But that is why we do not expect to see the O2 sensor stuck at a low voltage, because we know the fuel trims are working and the fuel trims are stable because the oxygen sensor is oscillating normally. As far as the being fixed at 0, I just threw that in basically because it looked kind of good. So let's go ahead and move on and start looking at some live data with this car and seeing if we can get some more indication where our problem may be. All right, I had forgotten I need to drive the car to warm it up, so I had to go out and take a little ride for a while to get into closed loop. But what we've got here is up at the top in red is our long-term fuel trim Bank 1. In green, our long-term fuel trim Bank 2, which is maybe a little bit high, but you know, anything under 10, honestly, I'm really not worried about it. We can see in red and green the respective O2 traces from each bank. As stated just before, they are normal traces as we would expect, even with the issue that we saw earlier, although we're not actually at the high Bank 1 level yet. Obviously, we'll have to be under load before we would expect to see a change there, but the O2 sensor is both working. And on the bottom, I've got my short-term fuel trim for, again, red Bank 1, green Bank 2. And actually, I just noticed that the scale is off a little bit on this. Let me fix this so that the scale is equal. Okay, so now we've got our scale leveled out on that. And what I am going to do is go ahead and hit the throttle. We are, of course, going to expect to see a pretty significant jump in only the red, but really probably not with the green, which of course would represent bank 1 going lean under load. So as we can see, we can get up, well, actually we didn't get up nearly as high as I had expected, but most certainly you can see that we got up to almost 15 there. I'm not quite sure why it didn't go up a lot higher. Maybe I need the engine actually under severe load, like driving the car. But anyway, we've definitely duplicated our issue here. We see that we do have a long-term fuel trim increasing only on bank 1. So let's try that one more time. I was actually expecting a little more of a bump from the short-term fuel trim as well, but we don't really see it. But whatever the case is, we definitely have a bank 1 specific problem. It probably would be exacerbated if I did this while driving the car, but we certainly can narrow down a little bit more that we do not likely have a vacuum leak. It does seem we have some type of fuel delivery issue happening on bank 1 only. So I am actually driving the car, finding a road that's a little bit not busy. Let's look at how our fuel trims are doing here. And we can see that actually look a little bit better, as a matter of fact. But it's going to be kind of hard to do this and hold the camera. But let me go ahead and shift here. And let's go ahead and get on the gas a little bit. And you can see that we definitely scream high on that bank 1 for sure. It does not like being put under load. So that is definitely closer to what I was expecting would cause a code. So let me actually go to a much higher gear so that I don't get caught with a speeding ticket or something. Let's try this again and let's look at our O2 sensor readings here. So I'm going to go ahead and get on it. You can see we're going very lean on bank 1, bank 2 is fine, but you see we are going rich at both O2 sensors there. So let me head home and let's start seeing if we can maybe put together a little bit more what might be going on. Maybe I'll be home a little bit later, but this is actually my rear view mirror you're looking at. The headlights that are comfortably, safely behind me, believe it or not, is it looked like a Nissan Sentra that had at least a 5-inch exhaust tip on it. You know how I love those things. Oh good, a yellow light coming up. Probably better turn off the camera. So how did it go with the rice burner? You tell me. Let's make a quiz question out of it. All right, which of the following graphs will best represent my encounter with the rice boy? Go ahead and choose from A, B, or C. All right, think you figured it out? Of course. If any of you have a high performance car, you know it's graph A. Allow me to explain. So on this graph, we have actually miles per hour here and time this way. And the distances here, the deltas between the lines, represent my distance between my car, which is in black, and the ricer, which is in green. Black, of course, representing the color of my car, green being the most effeminate color that I have of my 4 choices up here. So what happens is Rice Boy's moving along at a pretty high speed, well above the speed limit, while I am lawfully obeying the speed limit, as I always do. But upon seeing him, in order to help with the public safety, I want to inform him of his violation of the local codes. So I accelerate to keep up with him. Once I keep up with him, he, of course, pretends that I do not exist, and he acts as if he does not acknowledge the presence of the gurgling black Trans Am right next to him for a considerable amount of time. Inevitably, because he is driving Miss Daisy, he starts to slow down considerably, maybe even well below the posted speed limit. At which point, of course, I also have to slow down, but he will stay comfortably behind me, but keep me in front of him so that it is apparent that he does not acknowledge any kind of thing going on here. Then, eventually, at this point, I will get bored. So I pull off of the road to make my turn or make an exit. At which point, seeing that it is now safe, he accelerates greatly, far beyond his original speed, in a phenomenon known as the Ricer flyby. So that basically summarizes my experience with pretty much everybody who has a 4-cylinder car but thinks that they are Chuck Norris. And mind you, I actually know that I have a problem where my car is running lean that whole time. But I wanted to go over one other thing that we had. Let's put 0.9 volt here, 0.1 volt here. And as you remember, we saw our O2 traces looked normal. We had them on both banks. And then when I went wide open throttle, you have seen me do this in many videos, and it's one of my favorite diagnostics. When we went wide open throttle, the O2 sensors both went rich during that time of wide open throttle. So, quiz question. All right, your final quiz question is, based on the oxygen sensor at wide open throttle and only at wide open throttle, which of the following is most likely to be true? A, the problem with this car is a bad fuel pump. B, the problem with this car is a bad mass airflow sensor. C, the problem with this car is a bad O2 sensor. Or D, none of the above. Whoa. Okay, embarrassing. Let me fix that real quick. There is an E in changers. There we go. Now it works. I know. Don't yell at me. Don't get all on me. I'm totally aware. I never answered the question. What we are going to do is this, so pay careful attention, because I'm assuming by the end of this video particularly, you must be a hardcore subscriber most likely if you stuck around this long through the quiz. So what is going to happen, I have a pretty good idea what I want to do next on this car, but in the comments below, would you mind putting your ideas, not what you want to see changed? You guys know this channel. We don't change parts on this channel. But what is the next diagnostic step you would like to see? What is an idea that you think even may be wrong with the car? But don't just sit there and go, well, I think it's oxygen sensor. How would you test it? How would you validate that before we go ahead and change a part? So give me some ideas. What we will do is I will take the best ones and put the ideas up on, of course, the dry erase board of knowledge. The last idea will be most likely the one that I am thinking that I want to do next. And then that way we can sort of take care of addressing everybody's ideas and sort of act like a team on this. So I think it'll probably be about 2 weeks before I get around to doing this because I've got a bunch of cars this weekend. So we'll give it about 2 weeks. We'll compile some of the best non-repetitive ideas, and then we will go ahead and use your ideas to try to fix this car. So until then, thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful. Hopefully you guys can help me. Talk to you later.